Welcome to Product Academy Tough Stuff, the podcast where we cut through the noise and get straight to the toughest challenges in product management. I'm Tanya Lau.
And I'm Francesca Cortesi.
In each episode, we tackle one tough question. No fluff, no filler. Just candid insights from seasoned product leaders.
Our guests deliver actionable, real-world answers. Whether you're an experienced product leader or just stepping into the product world, this is your go-to podcast for sharp, tested advice, condensed for your busy schedule.
One tough challenge, practical insights, short and real.
Let's dive in.
Hi everyone listening to this. If it's here in Stockholm, it's a sunny day for a change. And I'm here with Kai talking about something that I think it's really interesting. And if you know me, you know that I've been doing discovery with my teams for a long time. We work with Opportunity Solutions Tree, and we had a lot of struggles like along the way, as everyone does. Anything from, how do you take with customers? How do you collect feedback? How do you get people interested? And I thought I had so many problems until I started to talk with people that were actually doing discovery with hardware. And I was like, my problems are not that big anyhow, right? I can still figure them out because, I've been mentoring and talking with people that have like this dichotomy almost like, we have an hardware that have certain processes and we have to do it. How can we get like this all continuous discovery, doing things quick and iterate when you actually have to get like an old production in place? And that's exactly the hard and tough question that we're going to explore today together with Kai, who's going to tell us all how we do discovery in hardware. So welcome to the show, Kai.
Thanks a lot, Francesca. And
No
maybe
pressure,
the first
right?
disclaimer, it's not a perfect story, right? I want to share a very open story also of how we struggled applying discovery in the world of hardware. And thanks most of all for having me here in your show. It's a pleasure.
And I think that's the story. Those are the stories that we want to hear about because, we have a lot of books and we know how to do things in the perfect world. But the real mess and fun starts when you try to apply this principle in the real world. So maybe tell us a little bit like, what was your context and how did you explore the discovery things in hardware?
Yeah, maybe to give a little bit of an explanation of my previous role at Tado. At Tado, I've been a group product manager. And as you might know, Tado is a smart thermostat manufacturer. So we developed a suite of smart thermostats. When I joined the company back in 2021, we had just embarked on that journey, which was a quite challenging journey because we were rebuilding our entire hardware portfolio with replacing products, including also the tech stack behind it. So it was a very large-scale endeavor, where of course we needed to, together with the team, figure out how do we want to design these products? How can we make sure that this next generation is also a big leap forwards in terms of usability, but also in terms of a fitting business case, of course. And I think that's a very challenging combination. I also listened to your episode with Rich, which very much resonated to me, because it's not only in hardware about developing very nice, shiny, user-friendly products. You also, in a highly competitive market, have to fit it, of course, in a certain business case. That's already challenging for one product. Let be that you have to do that for an entire product portfolio, all from scratch. Of course, I did not do that alone. I worked in a cross-functional leadership team in our group. And then we had cross-functional product teams, several of them taking care of individual products in our portfolio.
So basically, if I understand you correctly, like you were in this company doing hardware, like smart hardware, so hardware with software. And you were in a position when you had to reboost the entire portfolio. And normally, like if you would ask me, like I've been in that position only with software, I will be, let's do some discovery, let's figure it out. Let's see, let's put an experiment out. If it doesn't work, we're going to take it back and we're going to tweak. That's how we work. But I'm guessing like in that context, you couldn't really be so, let's use this word, agile, right? Because once you put like those hardware into production, then there's no tweaking anymore. So I'm super curious, like, how did you approach that, like defining the portfolio and how that hardware and software portfolio should be in a way that like worked for the customer and work for the business connected with like the money component to it?
Yeah, maybe first let me explain what makes it so hard in hardware.
Yeah,
you already touched upon it a little bit. There are several elements. So first of all, your what I call cycle time, or your time to market, is pretty long with a hardware product. You can easily take 1.5 to 2 years before your product hits the market. That's not quite near the time frame of a usual MVP, where you want to validate your assumptions through a working product, right?
Becomes a really expensive MVP. 2 years.
Yeah, very expensive. And if you're wrong after these 2 years, then you're probably out of the game, because you cannot just start another 2 years, right? Then your competitor will be there first. So already from that perspective, you need to find very smart and clever lean ways to at least build up already evidence before you make a first working product. And the second thing that has more to do with the impact of your decisions is what I call it once is for all, right? So once a hardware device is out there in the world, even if it's just 10, okay, 10 is still manageable, right? But if it's just hundreds of customers and not yet thousands, it will be there forever, right? So if you make the wrong decisions in your hardware design, you need to live with that as a company for decades sometimes, right? So just to give you one example, before Tado, I worked at another smart thermostat company in the Netherlands. The product was called Tone, and there was a Tone first generation and a second generation. And the first generation was very limited in memory and also disk space. So for the second generation, we kept innovating, we kept adding features, etc. But the first generation, which was the vast majority of our users out there, simply ran out of disk space and memory, so we couldn't add any more features, at least not without removing or making workarounds or these kind of things, right? So any piece of hardware, including the invisible stuff like memory and disk space, can limit your innovation later on. And that means that every decision you take as a product team in hardware can actually weigh quite heavy on your shoulders. Well, oh gosh, if we make the wrong decision now, you realize that it has a high impact also in the future.
And I mean, what you're describing is like high risk situation, right? Because every decision you make, it's irreversible, right? Because once it's out, it's out. And I would almost argue that is the perfect play field for discovery, because the whole thing with discovery is like de-risking things. But how can you de-risk things when you cannot produce the thing that you want to de-risk? How did you do it?
Yeah, so maybe we have to distinct here discovery from continuous discovery, right? If you apply continuous discovery, you lean heavily on the principle of two-way door decisions, right? Where you can quickly do something, see what happens. If it turns out wrong, you revert or you apply an update and then you adjust again, right? And that's what we just mentioned is at least not with everything the case in the world of hardware. So first of all, you do a little bit more upfront discovery than you would do in the software world. I mean, also in the software world, you have situations where you want to do a little bit more or heavier upfront discovery before you put something in production. But in the world of hardware, that's even more, I would say. But then again, you have a certain time to market, right? So it's not that you can do a 2-year discovery phase, because then again, you are too slow. We had a very challenging timeline with our new product generation at Tado. So it's a constant struggle and a constant navigation game to balance between velocity, moving forwards, proceeding to the next stage, already starting developing the product. And on the other side, collecting the right level of evidence to be sure enough that you're placing the right bets. And you're never 100% sure, right? That made it sometimes also really scary, and sometimes also not only for us as a team, but also for our stakeholders, our sales department, our marketing department, right? We through conversations, we needed to find that balance and decide, yes, now it's time to move on and start already developing the product. But before that, of course, there are very lean things that you can consider doing with your team in hardware to build up that evidence. And of course, the very first thing, just like in the software world, is just talking with your users, right? And applying the right interviewing techniques and trying to see the patterns through those conversations. So we also, of course, did that. In the world of hardware, you can also do more classical surveys to figure out which variants sell better. We mainly sold our devices online, so we could perfectly simulate an online sales channel, put several variants out there, and then get some quantified results of which concept works best. But selling something is not using something, right? So the biggest challenge is, how do you figure out, because maybe it sells on a picture, but then people don't like it when they start using it. They will place bad reviews, and then over time your sales will also sink again because you have all 1-star reviews, right? So you also want to figure out, how would this device, how would this be understood from a desirability perspective by real customers? And there, again, it's not a perfect story, right? So it all sounds very shiny when you talk about it in a podcast, but sometimes we did better and sometimes we did less good. But we tried at least to simulate real-world situations, for example, by taking some existing hardware that we had and slightly modifying it. Imagine that we would like to validate a different way of turning up and down the temperature on the thermostat. We would try to, with our engineers, make a very quick modification to the existing hardware and then take that to the lobby of our office building and then do some very rapid experimentation and some rapid interviewing with the canteen lady, with people working at other companies in our building to get very rapid feedback on certain ideas. And then we would quickly rule the bad ones out, right? And then you end up with the good ones, and then we would combine that with some more quantified research, for example. And then in the end, you hope to have enough evidence from all those different lean research methods that you applied, and you decide together with your stakeholders if you move on or you run another round of validating.
And I mean, it's super interesting what you're saying. I want to unpack two things. I mean, the first thing you said is that discovery is a palette of tools. And maybe the very first mind frame that we have to do is that in hardware, maybe we don't take the palette of continuous discovery, but we go into maybe more traditional discovery methods, because what we need to create, it's like as robust as we can get hypothesis that this is going to work. So you mentioned like interviews, you mentioned that you can fake it till you make it and you put it online, like these kind of things. You really have to build something. And then I would also say that you had luck, possibility, I don't even know how to say, like to have this a little bit tweaks of the physical product. Maybe, I mean, I'm even thinking with people that I talk with, maybe there are some people working with hardware that do not have that luck. Let's say you create like some software integrating music in a car, or you are working with a dishwasher. I mean, it's like you cannot bring it down in the lobby. So, and there's still like the importance part of usability that you highlighted there. And I think that like the usability component, I mean, you can test desirability, how you said before, like we test an interview, but the usability is the real hard nut to crack. Would you have any tips for the ones maybe that have a dishwasher or a washing machine and they cannot like quickly, fixing it to check desirability?
Yeah, exactly. I would not bring the washing machine to the lobby. That's a little bit difficult.
That would be fun.
No, but then I would try to bring people to my prototype, right? So I can imagine that you have some prototype, or maybe you don't have the entire washing machine, but you only have a prototype of the user interface and you just put it in a wooden board. But my takeaway is that you need to be very inventive and creative to set up whatever works in your environment to get as close as possible to the real product, basically. But yeah, that depends on your context and if that's possible, right?
So you will
Yeah.
still tip of trying to create that physical product in a way or
Yes.
another. Like it could be like, oh, I take a wooden box that is as big as my washing machine, and then I show
Exactly.
here the whatever, the software, how it's gonna work.
Exactly, because for desirability risk, it's crucial that you observe what people do instead of asking them what they would do. And observing what people do with a physical product without having a physical thing is really difficult, right? Because then you have shiny renders that you show on the screen, and then, yeah, maybe you can learn a little bit from it, but they cannot hold it in their hands. They cannot swipe, touch it. We had very interesting results from our research, right? Where people would actually, for example, not understand how to change the temperature, and they would actually rip the entire device from the wall because they were just looking and trying, and right. So these kind of insights is something that you only get when you move into the real physical world.
And this brings me also like back to other thing that I thought was really interesting when you said it's about the decision and the people that you have to bring into the decisions to make sure that you have as accurate as possible, as precise as possible decision before going into production. So the decision chain, I think, was really interesting, and connecting to what you just said. I mean, I'm just guessing, and you correct me because I don't have experience in hardware, but to create this prototype for usability could get expensive. So you maybe need like a okay or like a decision point in there. How would you pitch if like if you say, okay, we need to check with people if like, you know, this new software work, but we need to build something that is going to cost X. Have you ever had like a, you know, someone on the other side say, no, we shouldn't? I mean, what are we even testing? And how did you answer to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And first reply is that, yes, it takes some money to make, for example, a 3D printing model that can cost a few €1,000. Yet if you put it next to the business case of developing a hardware product fully and bringing it to the market with the wrong features, that's just a fraction, right? So we shouldn't be too scared about spending some money to validate our assumptions fast, if that's possible, right? I would rather say it's a timeline issue, right? I think it's never really a money issue. That's an easy business case to explain to your stakeholders. It's more of a timeline constraint, because then you have to wait until that 3D model is manufactured, and that takes a few weeks. And the question usually is not, do we have the money or is it worth the money, but do we actually have the time to still wait for that, or do we decide already to move on? I don't have a magic formula there. In my experience, this is through conversations, making very transparent to your stakeholders what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you want to validate. And in my experience, it's also good to bring some scenarios, right? So scenario A is what we call the perfect validation. We will make a 3D model that looks quite realistic, but that takes most time. Scenario B is that we do something more lean. We would still have a physical product, but we make it easier and faster. As scenario C is that we skip it all and we just do basically on desk research and surveying and other sources that we have. We decide that it's acceptable to take the risk, and we move on.
And then in this 3 scenario, I'm guessing your like the 3 variables that you will have to debate is like how robust is our idea of usability, slash, if you flip it, what's the risk, what's the impact on the timeline, and what will be the cost.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So you try to evaluate those aspects, right, and then you weigh it off together with your team and your stakeholders. You simply cannot do that with everything, right? So typically you have 1 or 2 or 3 hot potatoes where you know, like, hey, this is how we want to distinguish ourselves from the competition, for example, or this is something that's very new technology. We still have to figure out how it works, etc. So, just like it works with when you start validating your assumptions in a continuous discovery environment, you will map your assumptions. You will identify the most risky ones, and you will focus on validating those through prototyping.
So basically, that's also another thing that, I mean, put your energy where the highest risk is.
Yeah.
And I want to like go a little bit back into the timeline and decision making, because obviously, as you said, I mean, the timeline is connected to the physical production timeline. So, I mean, you don't have that much, I'm guessing here, like room to stretch it, unless like it's really big consequences down the line. And that, I guess, in like combining discovery with this timeline is like a really hard part, as you said. Do you have any concrete tips on how you, I don't know if you designed a process with your stakeholders, like to keep them so having like different points in the decision line, you know, connected with the timeline, and how did you do anything that it was like to try to optimize that flow?
Yes, first of all, it's very important that you distinguish what we call then the one-way door decisions that are that would have a high impact and that are irreversible from the two-way door decisions. Because also in connected hardware, you have many two-way door decisions that you can try and change your mind, etc. As long as it's not a physical thing in the hardware product. So if it's software on the hardware, then usually it's still a two-way door decision, right? So if you start treating everything as a one-way door decision, so everything needs to be validated upfront before you start the manufacturing process, then your discovery phase upfront will become simply way too long.
Yeah.
So the first recommendation is identify all the decisions you need to make together with your team, and take a very deliberate approach to your decision making. Hey, these are the things, and those are typically the physical things, right? The buttons, the display, the shape of the device. Typically, those are the things that you want to approach more with an upfront discovery approach. And then the other things like how will the battery saving mode behave, for example? That's something that we can update over the air, right? That doesn't need to be locked in from the very first day of development of the hardware product. So shift all those things and basically park them until you have validated your one-way door decisions, so your real hardware stuff. Because if you try to do everything at once, it will make you very, very, very slow, right? So you put these two-way door decisions to the end of your manufacturing process, and then you can figure them out. And that gives you focus on the things that really matter at this point. And then what we learned over time at Tado is we would only place these products on a commercial roadmap once we have agreed on what we call the high-level requirements for our hardware products, which were really the fundamental hardware decisions, right? So even within these two-way or these one-way door decisions that I mentioned, so the buttons, the display, the shape, etc., then you can, from those, you can select the most critical ones. And we would say, hey, until we have figured out and officially decided how we want to approach these fundamental building blocks, only then we would actually go to sales and say, here, this is the time to market, this is the timeline, this is the moment that we need to start co-developing our go-to-market strategy, etc.
When you say we decided which feature were important, who is we?
That's of course we as a team together with our stakeholders. So that would always include sales, marketing, and even the management team at Tado. But we would propose based on our view and experience on developing the product. We would make a proposal and then align that, of course, together with our stakeholders. And that's actually something that I also wanted to touch upon, and that also came back in the episode with Rich. That's why it resonated so much with me, is that I think even more in the world of hardware, you need to be very sharp on your value risk, including, so value risk is mostly external, right? Is there a customer segment that sees enough value in this product that we want to bring to the market? But you should not forget about the internal question. Do we have the capabilities as a company to unlock that value towards these customers? So for example, if we would sell our thermostats in a B2B channel, like the installer channel, you need to also be sure that you have the capabilities as a company to leverage that channel. And you need to validate, at least to a certain extent, that you have a trustworthy go-to-market strategy for the channel before you actually start developing that hardware product. Because that's equally important, right? So maybe there is a market and maybe you can develop a really nice product, but if you don't have the capabilities together with sales and marketing to also channel that into the market, then you still risk a very expensive road to bring such a product to the market, but not succeeding because you don't manage to sell it in that channel, for example.
But that what I'm hearing is basically like in that moment when there is a proposition of like, this is the baseline of our hardware, then that kind of like, there needs to be a sign off that is really robust from everyone, like from management yes. to the ones like working on hardware and software, and from the go-to-market and everyone, because that's probably of all the one doors decision that you described, it's the biggest, it's the gate door decision. Like when you close
absolutely.
that, then you're
yes.
like,
yeah,
no way back.
Yeah. So talking about viability, right? When you make that sign off to start the development of a hardware product, you should have enough evidence for these fundamental building blocks in terms of value and desirability and usability. But there should also be a high confidence or high enough confidence in the viability for the company, right? And that doesn't end with product management, right? The sales directors should also chip in there. I had a very good collaboration with our sales director at Tado, and we would heavily prepare these decision meetings together. So that was not just me as a product manager there saying, yeah, I have a business case here. No, he would also vouch for that and say, hey, we have carefully considered the strategy to bring this product to the market, and I vouch for it as a sales director in this company, right? So in terms of viability, it's really important that you don't do this alone from the product angle, but that you do that together with your colleagues from sales and marketing.
I mean, I think this is like, if I zoom back and try, okay, I'm starting a new job, and I'm like put myself in this extremely hard but challenging and fun situation, and I have hardware and software. So what I heard you saying is like, first thing is that you have to understand that for the hardware part of the job, it's not continuous discovery, but it's more like validation, like the old way, that I should try to do it as much as possible upfront, considering my timeline, because that's like a really important thing that I have to take into consideration, and I cannot stretch it as much as I normally do with software. Just focus the first part of the discovery more on the hardware things. Try in that to also, in a way or another, have some kind of usability, because that's going to be key, especially for differentiating in the market. And when you come from this discovery to have like an idea of what should actually be in that hardware, then you need to have a really deep conversation with like the go-to-market and the sales and the marketing, I guess, depending on your company, to actually have them also pitch in. So you have the viability discovered as well before you get that, let's call it gate sign off, because after that, like, you're gonna be like a little bit screwed if you took the wrong decision. And when I'm like on the other side of that gate and my hardware starts like being produced somewhere that I don't see, I can start doing a little bit more discovery for the software. I think this is a really amazing roadmap, like thinking process for someone that has to approach it. Anything that I missed that you want to add?
Wow, that was a great summary. I just want to emphasize in the last thing that you said, I think that's really important. In a recent talk that I facilitated in a company, the product managers there in the room, they said, but this is just waterfall, right? So you just do a big discovery phase and then you put all the requirements in your PRD and then you execute that. But that's wrong, right? That's not it, right? The art of bringing, in this modern time, bringing successful hardware products or smart hardware products to the market is that balance, right? Do the right things up front, but do as much as possible in a continuous way so that you remain fast and also agile in terms of adapting your product based on surfacing insights and feedback that you get along the way. And that to me is the main takeaway that you have to, and that's, in my experience, really an art, that you have to find that balance together with your team and stakeholders.
Yeah. And I think that's like the best advice, right? It's not only because it's hardware that you have to do it waterfall. I mean, there is like a fine line to walk there. And I think, I mean, maybe this is another tough question, but I mean, you might have some stakeholders that you have to bring to your side that think still waterfall, or they use with waterfall. And there is like the conversation that you need to land. But that's probably for another episode. Thank you so much, Kai, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Product Academy Tough Stuff.
We hope today's tough question gave you practical, actionable insights.
If you enjoyed the episode, do us a favor and leave a rating or review. It will help us grow the podcast and make future episodes even better.
Got a question for us? Send an email to toughstuff@productacademy.ch and ask away. We read any submission and might answer yours in a later episode.
Thank you again for listening. We'll see you next time with another tough challenge to tackle.
Until then, take care.